In a quiet village in the east. The wind blew in a cold afternoon, making the branches to dance to its tone. Mrs. Ekeen sat in front of her house with a tray of melon when her only daughter came running into the compound in excitement. "Mama, Mama, I passed my examination. I passed my senior certificate examination," she shouted in joy. Mrs. Ekeen opened her arms wide and Naomi ran into them. "I'm so proud of you, my daughter," Mrs. Ekeen said, hugging her only child. Naomi was still smiling sheepishly when she noticed that the joy had left the face of her mother. Mrs. Ekeen untangled her arms from her daughter and took few steps backwards. She sat on the bench outside the house. Her eyes were clouded with tears which were about to roll down. "What is it, Mama?" Naomi asked, sitting beside her mother. "I'm so sorry your parents can't send you to further your education. Your father is sick and needs medical attention. We don't even have enough to send him to the hospital. All we rely on is traditional herbs. If not the scholarship you merited because of your intelligence, I'm sure we won't have been able to send you to secondary school. I'm really trying my best to provide for everyone. Now you are done with secondary school. Who is going to send you to the university? Will all these your intellect go for waste?" Mrs. Ekeen asked rhetorically, shaking her head in sadness. Naomi knew all her mother had said were true. She felt bad she wasn't going to continue her education to fulfill her dreams. She pulled closer to her mother and hugged her, wiping her mother's tears and hiding hers. "Don't worry, Mama. I don't want to be an extra burden to you. Instead, I'll stay back here in the village and help you take care of Papa," Naomi said, trying to cheer up her mother. The next day, Naomi was going to the stream to fetch water. Some of her classmates met up with her at the stream. They were discussing the university they were going to go to, but Naomi was mute. She had nothing to say and continued fetching the water she had come for. "Why are you not talking?" one of them asked her. "What do you want her to say? Can her parents send her to the university?" one of her classmates mocked. "On. She won't be able to see the four walls of the university," another said, and they all laughed. Naomi was in pain and tears rolled down her cheeks. When Naomi got home, she didn't let her mother notice she was crying. She made up her mind to do every work possible to go to the university. She started doing all types of menial job just to save up money to train herself in the university. She worked on people's farms, she washed people's clothes and hawked things around. Though Naomi was so beautiful, many village boys always came her way, but she was focused on achieving her dreams. Months later, Naomi was going back home after the long day's work on someone's farm. A car driving by splashed muddy water on her. She looked at her dress and continued her way without uttering any word. The car, which had just splashed water on her, slowly reversed, coming back to where she was. "I'm so sorry for splashing water on you," the voice from inside the car said. "I was talking on the phone and didn't see the potholes on time. I'm so sorry," he continued, looking honest. "It's okay, sir. I'm on my way home already, and besides, my clothes are not that clean anyways. I'll clean up when I get home," Naomi answered politely and continued on her way. "Where are you going so I can drop you off in order to apologize?" Ernest, the guy in the car, said with a smile. "Don't worry, sir. It's okay, I can walk home. I'm almost home," Cassandra replied and continued walking down. Ernest was so touched. Any other village girl would have quickly entered into his car, but seems there is something special about this particular girl. He tried stretching his hand to give her some money, but Naomi, who kept walking, declined, saying she hasn't done anything for him to earn the money. "See you some other time," Ernest said with a smile and drove off. Ernest arrived at a junction where his friend George was waiting for him. It was his first time coming to the village of Amazu. He had come to visit his friend George in his village. George was so happy Ernest had come to his village for the first time. That night, Ernest couldn't stop thinking about the girl he just met few hours ago. There was something about her, the way she spoke, her manners and her beauty couldn't get out of his head. The next day, George decided to show Ernest around his village. As George was driving, he felt a continuous tap on his shoulders. He slowed down. Ernest pointed at a young girl who was washing clothes. "Who is this young girl? Ever since I met her yesterday, my heart couldn't just rest. I really want to know who she is." Ernest asked George, who had slowed down to observe who Ernest was talking about. George told Ernest that he was going to find out who she was. After spending a while just watching Naomi wash people's clothes for money, George drove off with Ernest. In the evening of the same day, George came back to Ernest. He had done his research on the girl he had showed her. "Her name is Naomi, and I heard she just passed her wake and was the best student in her class. But from what I heard also, her father has been sick for some years now and no money to give him a proper treatment. Her mother is doing her best to take care of the family," George said. "There is really something special about this girl, and I can't seem to place my fingers on it. I would like to send her to the university," Ernest said, drinking down the beer he had poured into the glass cup. "Do you think her parents will allow you take their only daughter? What will you tell them you came for? To take their only child with you to the city to send her to the university?" George asked, looking at Ernest and expecting an answer. "That's a nice question. But don't you worry, George. When we get there you will see that God works in mysterious ways," Ernest said, and poured another beer inside the glass cup to replace the one he just drank. He lifted up the glass and kept staring at it like he was looking for an answer inside the cup. Then Ernest stood up from the chair holding his glass. "You'll go with me, George," he said, and sipped the beer he was carrying. The next day, Ernest went with George to Naomi's house. Mrs. Keen was surprised seeing a car drive Eno her little compound. Two guys came down from the car and walked towards where she was seated. Mr. Keen's house was looking dilapidated, which implies that things were really going rough with the family. Ernest and George greeted Mrs. Keen with a smile. She stood up and received them, still wondering what they were looking for in her house. "Are you sure you're in the right house? Who are you looking for?" Mrs. Keen asked, looking at Ernest, then at George. "No, we are not in the wrong house, and we have come to see you, Mama," George answered with a smile. "Can we go inside?" Ernest asked politely. Mrs. Keen looked at the two young men who looked cheerful. Their smiles could tell of how harmless they were. So she walked into her house, while they followed her behind. Ernest and George were still going into the house when they heard wailing noises. Mrs. Keen immediately ran into the room, knowing it was her husband, Mr. Keen. His sickness was getting worse, and he was crying in pains. Ernest followed Mrs. Keen into her room with George. When they entered, they saw the bad state of Mr. Keen. The bed which Mr. Keen was lying down on was old, and the room smelled of different herbs that were in different bottles on the floor in the room. George was still looking around the room when Ernest quickly held Mr. Keen, who was wailing. "Help me, George, let's carry him into the car," Ernest said, holding Mr. Keen. George helped, and they both helped Mr. Keen, who continued wailing in pains. They carried him into the car, and Mrs. Keen joined him, her husband, at the back seat, and they left for the hospital. Arrival at the hospital, Mr. Keen was quickly received by the doctor due to the emergency. Though Mr. Keen might be young, but the sickness had made him to look older than his age. He was looking slim and malnourished. Ernest tried consoling Mrs. Keen, who was crying. She doesn't want to end up being a widow. After a long time of waiting, the doctor who had gone in with Mr. Keen came out. Mrs. Keen asked the doctor how her husband was doing. The doctor told her they were lucky to have brought him on time. If not, he wouldn't have made it. He told them Mr. Keen was out of danger, and they could go see him. Mrs. Keen was happy she didn't lose her husband. She ran into the room where he lay. She held his hand and tears ran down her cheeks. She remembered her daughter. She turned towards Ernest. "Please, I need to go get my daughter. She must be home and worried about us," she said in tears. Ernest told her not to worry, as he was going to get Naomi. Naomi had come back home after her day's work, and she realized the door was left open. She went into her house and couldn't find anyone. She called out to her mother, but no one answered. After searching everywhere inside the house, Naomi ran outside to look for her mother and her father, who seemed not to be at home. She doesn't have a phone, neither does her parents. She asked around to know if anyone saw her parents. She was told that a black car drove into their compound and left again in a haste. Naomi got scared and could feel her heart pounding and tears rolled down her cheeks. She was confused and didn't know what else to do. A black car drove towards Naomi and stopped in front of her. Someone came down from the car. Naomi recognized he was the one that had splashed her muddy water days ago. "Your father is in the hospital, and your mother asked me to come get you," Ernest said, walking up to Naomi. "Hospital? Which hospital?" "Hope nothing happened to my father," Naomi asked, looking worried. "Let's go," Ernest said, making a sign to Naomi to follow him. She walked with him to his car, and they drove to the hospital. After few family moments in the hospital, Ernest thought it was the right time to air his mind, since he had limited time to spend in his friend's village. He looked at Mrs. E. Keene and said, "Mama, I'm so sorry I'm saying this at the wrong time. I heard Naomi had passed her wake and is aspiring to continue her education. I want to be the one to sponsor her in the university. There is something peculiar about your daughter I can't seem to lay my hands on. I would like her to go to the university right there in my city so I can have my eyes on her. The university is another world, Mama, and I wouldn't want her to mingle with bad friends." "Yes, Mama. I'm the son of Chief Obler, and I'm assuring you Naomi will be in the best hand. If anything happens to her, I would be held responsible," George added. Mrs. E. Keene was so happy that finally someone was going to send Naomi to the university. She looked at Naomi's face and happiness was written all over. She looked at Mr. E. Keene and tears was rolling down the side of his eyes. "We'll be waiting outside," Ernest said when he noticed the tears on Mr. E. Keene's eyes. When George had left with Ernest, Naomi went towards her father. She held his hand and said, "Papa, I won't. It's okay, my daughter. I know you want to fulfill your dreams of going to the university. I don't want to stop you. I know Chief Obler too well, and he is a man of integrity. All I want you to do is never to forget your parents. I want you to study hard and fulfill your dreams. I believe God had sent this young man our way. If he hadn't visited us today, maybe I would have been a dead man. My blessings are with you, my daughter," Mr. E. Keene said and broke down in tears. So did Mrs. E. Keene. It's 3 days already, and Ernest was set to leave for the city with George and Naomi. Mr. E. Keene was already home. Ernest had bought a phone for him and Mrs. E. Keene in order to stay in touch with their daughter. Ernest also gave some amount of money to Mrs. E. Keene to take care of Mr. E. Keene and for their upkeep. Naomi hugged her mother tightly and tears rolled down both their cheeks. Naomi waved her parents goodbye in tears and entered into the car. They started the journey to the city. Naomi was seated behind with few of her luggages. She looked around her village as she left. It was her first time leaving the village ever since she was born. She couldn't explain the compound feelings of joy and sadness. She wiped her tears as it rolled down. George cheered her up from the front seat where he was seated with Ernest. It was a very long drive. Ernest dropped off George at his place and continued with Naomi to his own house. On getting to the gate, Ernest came down from the car and opened the gate with a key he was holding. He entered again into the car and drove in. Naomi kept looking around when they came down from the car. The bungalow was looking very modern, and the compound was very clean. She kept looking around like she was expecting to see something or someone. "What is wrong?" Ernest asked Naomi when he saw she was looking uneasy. "I'm sorry, sir. But what about those you are staying with?" Naomi asked politely. "I'm staying all alone," Ernest answered, shaking his head with a mild smile. Naomi held her little luggage tight as she got scared. Her mother had taught her that staying alone with a man will make him want to forcefully sleep with her. She really hopes she has not made a mistake by following an unknown man to the city because of her quest to go to the university. "Don't be scared," Ernest said, seeing how Naomi was shaking. "You can go ahead and call your parents. Tell them that you arrived safely in the city," he added. After Naomi called her parents, who were happy and blessed her over the phone, she walked in with her bag. Ernest's parlor was looking very beautiful and clean. He had taste for nice things, especially the way he arranged his stuffs and beautified the parlor. Naomi was looking around in admiration when Ernest called her and showed her to a room where she kept her stuff. A few minutes later, Naomi came out and prepared dinner. When they were done eating, Naomi cleared the table and went back to bed. She couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about her parents and the village. She was also scared that Ernest may try to rape her, so she stood up and bolted her door from the inside. The next day, Naomi woke up very early and was already cleaning up everywhere. Ernest got dressed and came out. He was impressed, and he told Naomi he was leaving for work and will be coming back in the evening. In the evening, Ernest came back with some good news. He had picked a jam form for her already and bought some books for her to read in preparation for the exams she was about to write. As the days rolled by, each time Ernest came to remind Naomi to study, he will see her studying already. He couldn't remember the last time he had seen someone this serious with her studies. Friends of Ernest who came to visit him once in a while asked him who Naomi was, and he always tells them she was his sister, but yet warned them to stay away from her. Ernest had fallen in love with Naomi from the very first day. He had set his eyes on her back then in the village. But he has always wanted to control it in order for Naomi to be focused on her studies. Weeks later, Naomi sat for the examination. When the results were out, she did well. Ernest was so proud of her. Naomi called her parents in the village, telling them that she has also passed her jam and will be going to the university very soon. After a few weeks, Naomi started her university education. Ernest made sure he saw to it that Naomi was very serious with her studies and had no distractions. When Naomi was done with the first level, Ernest decided it was best to take her back so she could see her parents. When they both drove down to the village, everyone was surprised to see Naomi. Just a year in the city, and she was already looking so good. Mr. and Mrs. Ekin thanked Ernest for taking care of their daughter so well. After a few days in the village, Ernest took Naomi back to the city with him. Naomi had already fallen in love with Ernest, but couldn't tell him because he acted like a big brother towards her. Never has he talked about love to her. All he was after was for her to study. Ernest made sure Naomi was focused on her studies. Years later, under Ernest's close watch, Naomi graduated into a very beautiful engineer. Ernest had connections and found a job for her in a big company. She was employed quickly because of her excellent grades. On a cool Sunday evening, Ernest was sitting outside with George relaxing over some sweating bottles. "That reminds me, Ernest, when are you planning to air out your feelings to Naomi? You said you didn't want her to get distracted, and you trained her all through the university. You spent your time and resources on her. Now she's a graduate, and you found her a job. What's your plan?" George asked his friend. "I'm taking my time, George. I'm planning to ask her out on a date. Then I'll let my intentions be known to her. I just want her to get her first salary and take it to her parents." Ernest answered, drinking up the beer he had poured out. "Ernest, my friend, Naomi is no longer a kid, as beautiful and intelligent as she is. Do you think other men don't have their eyes on her? Don't you think men in her new company will go after her? Don't let someone take your sleep from you," my friend George said, fixing his gaze on Ernest. Ernest lost his words and just kept on staring at his friend. A call came into George's phone. After answering the call, he drank up the last beer in his glass. Then he stood up to leave because he had an urgency. He turned and looked at Ernest and said, "A man who hangs around a beautiful girl without saying his intention ends up fetching water for guests at her wedding. But in your case, my friend, I'm just scared of the pains you'll go through when it's late," George said, and walked into his car. After George drove off, Ernest stood up from the seat and started pacing around his house. He thought for a while and made up his mind that it was the right time for him to open up to Naomi before someone else does. When Naomi came back home that day from work, She was tired because of the strenuous work at the office. Ernest couldn't put together the right words to say the bottled feelings he had kept over the years. Ernest made dinner that night and talked Naomi to sleep. From the way she acted towards him, Ernest could feel some connections between them that night. He wanted to touch her, but something asked him to wait a while more. Ernest decided he was going to buy an engagement ring. He will tell Naomi about his feelings and propose to her the same day, which will be on a Sunday. On Sunday, Naomi left for service without Ernest because he told her he had things to do. When Naomi left for church, Ernest began to plan his approach and the gifts he has already bought. He took his time and beautified Naomi's room and the parlor. When he was done, he sat in front of his compound and kept another chair opposite him, waiting eagerly for Naomi to come back from church. The time for service was over and Naomi was not yet back home. Ernest was worried. He picked up his phone to call her. He dialed her number and was about to call when he heard car horns in front of his gate. Ernest knew he didn't have any appointment with any of his friends that Sunday, so he was surprised a car horn was outside his gate. He stood up and went to get the gate. He opened the gate, and to his surprise, Naomi had already come down from the car and went to open the gate herself for someone else who was inside the car. Naomi greeted Ernest and went ahead to open the gate. The car drove into the compound slowly. Ernest was standing and just observing as Naomi directed the person driving with smiles all over her face. A tall, handsome young man came down from the car. His beards were neat and the clothes he wore hugged his muscular body. The perfume he wore added to the nice fragrance of the compound. "Good afternoon, sir," he greeted as he came down from the car. "Yeah, good afternoon. Who is he?" Ernest asked, looking at Naomi. "Uncle." "Let's sit down at least," Naomi said, going to pick up another chair to make it 3 chairs and a table. When they were seated, the guy said, "Sir, my name is Jackson, Naomi's boyfriend." "Oh, you're her boyfriend?" Ernest asked again, trying to hold back the tears clouding in his eyes. His heart was bleeding already, but he just had to hold it in. "Yes, sir. Naomi told me you are her big brother. So I decided to come see you, sir. I really love your sister. I would really love it if she becomes my wife someday," the young man said. Ernest looked at Naomi and she was blushing and smiling. That was when he realized what George has been saying all along. George had told him to propose to Naomi before sending her to school when they had arrived in the city. But he refused, saying he wanted Naomi to concentrate on her studies. His phone started ringing. He checked, and it was George who was calling him. He tried putting himself together and picked up the call, moving a bit away from the table where they were seated. George asked Ernest if Naomi said yes to him. Ernest had no answer. He asked George where he was and told him he would be coming there to meet him. Ernest told Naomi and her guest that he needed to be somewhere important. He left them and drove out of his house in his car. After driving for a while, Ernest finally arrived at where George was. "You were right, Naomi has someone else already. She brought him to my house today," Ernest said and wiped the tear that rolled down his cheek. "I told you, man. I kept warning you, but you didn't listen. Now just look at you. See how broken you are," George said to his friend. He tried calming Ernest down. He ordered some bottles of beer. Ernest didn't use a glass as usual. Instead, he drank directly from the bottle. He finished the first bottle quickly and continued immediately with the next. He wanted to drink away all his pains, all the years and fortune he had spent on Naomi. It started raining. Ernest got himself drunk and still continued drinking. At a time, George stopped him and told it was time to go back home. But Ernest didn't want to go back. George convinced Ernest in his drunken state and took him to his car. George hadn't come with a car, so he took Ernest back to his house in his own car. After Ernest left the house in a haste, Naomi spent some time with Jackson before he left. She needed to do some chores and then make food for Ernest. When she entered the sitting room, she saw balloons all over the place. It was a bit strange, but she continued to her room anyways to have a change of clothes. When she switched on the bulb, She found out that the bright fluorescent light had been replaced with dimmed blue light. Her room had been decorated, and on her bed it was written boldly, "I fell in love with you on first sight. Would you be my wife? Ring," with an engagement ring placed on the bed. Naomi was frozen, her eyes opened widely. Then she remembered how Ernest had left in a hurry with a sad face. That was because Jackson had come to tell him about their relationship. Naomi could feel tears rolling down her cheeks. She couldn't stand looking at the gifts and decorations Ernest had made in her room. She covered her mouth and ran outside. The weather changed and it started raining. Naomi sat under the rain crying out bitterly, and she got herself drenched. After Naomi had cried her eyes out, the rain stopped, and she went back into the house still putting on the wet cloth. George walked in with Ernest, who was staggering. Naomi, I love you. I've always loved you," Ernest said, staggering towards Naomi in tears. He was stinking of beer, and he fell on the cushion muttering words. Naomi stood looking at Ernest, and tears rolled down her cheeks seeing how drunken and heartbroken he was. "Naomi, my friend here really loves you. Just look at him. Have you ever seen him like this before? He is heartbroken. Please consider my friend. I'll leave you both to it," George said and walked out of the house. Naomi helped Ernest up from the cushion where he was lying and took him to his room. She removed his shoes and laid him down properly on the bed. She was about to leave when Ernest held her arm. She looked at him, and he was already sleeping. She removed his hand and left the room. She walked into her room, and the tears couldn't stop flowing down her cheeks. She had a shower and changed her clothes. She laid on the bed but couldn't sleep. Different thoughts kept sweeping through her mind. She slept off after soaking her pillow with tears because of the decision she was about to make. The next morning, Ernest woke up. He remembered all that had happened yesterday. He didn't know how he was going to face Naomi. If only he knew, he would have opened up earlier when his friend had suggested it to him. Ernest decided he was going to tell Naomi how he felt and apologize for taking so much time. He stood up and went into the kitchen where he found Naomi most of the time. Either she was making breakfast or sorting things in the kitchen. When he got to the kitchen, no one was there. He walked towards Naomi's room. He knocked on the door. No one answered. He knocked again and no one answered. Ernest called out Naomi's name, and still there was no response. That was unlike her. She doesn't sleep that deep, Ernest thought. So he tried opening the door, and it opened wide on its own. No one was in the room. Ernest saw a neat piece of paper placed perfectly on the bed with a pen on top. It read,